When I was 9 years old, my parents bought land outside of Tulsa to raise horses. Now our slice of land backed up to a 9-acre wood with a large ravine running through it that went all the way down to the Arkansas River. Neighbors' pastures surrounded us. Our horizons were nearly uninterrupted vistas of nature and Oklahoma sky. We had the best sunsets. During those early years, we worked as a family with friends to recover the land after decades of neglect. And finally, after restoring the barn, building fences, and rehabilitating the pastures, we were ready to welcome our first horses. Now, even with good grazing, horses require tending. They needed fresh water, oats, and in the winter, fresh hay. This ritual took place twice a day, once in the early morning and once in the afternoon. And although the horses were my father's dream, somehow that job fell to me and my sister. I fed the horses in the early morning before school around 6:30 a.m. every day. There were no family vacations. And when my sister graduated high school, I also fed the horses in the afternoon. In our barn in the pastures, I spent a small part of my day, every season, all weather, outside. Now, winter was the hardest season, even here in Oklahoma. Rolling out of bed in the darkness and running down the hill from our house to the barn with my companion, if it wasn't too cold, my golden retriever, Clifford. The horses and cats gathered to greet me, and the cold bit at my hands. The dark morning surrounded us, and like any true child, I often left behind a coat. The lack of light made the early morning mysterious and quiet. All my senses came alive in the dark, early morning. And those winter mornings often made my chores more difficult. But winter also brought new opportunities. Winter made it possible to roam the woods as a child. Those cold, dark days meant I could explore the forest and the ravine behind our house for hours with less fear of snakes, ticks, yes, and scorpions. The wonder of the sound of the animals and myself moving through the leaves. The joy of experiencing the icy cold water around my boots. Winter revealed the land in new ways, with the trees stripped bare and the grass golden brown. The sounds changed. The smells were altered. And now that I'm older, I realize that I am changed too, if I only pay attention to winter like I used to. Winter on the farm was also about waiting for the ground to thaw, the ice to melt. We were out in the country, the power to come back on, the cold to slip away, the bright light of sun to return and increasingly warm my mornings and light my way. Winter in our lives is much the same. We wait. We wait for the bad news to get better. We wait for a new way where there seems to be no way. We realize that we hope, and what we hope for cannot always be. But there is still love. There is still life in the in-between. The winter solstice, while the official start of winter, simultaneously provided us a glimpse of spring and summer as we shift from the shortening days and the longer nights to growing daylight and shorter nights. Day by day, minute by minute, our days grow longer. This year's winter solstice was yesterday. And the word solstice is derived from Latin, and it literally means the sun stands still, which acknowledges the sun's appearance of rising and setting from the same place on the horizon for about 8 celebration marked this time of year. To be sure, there were bonfires and candles and evergreens, gift-giving and stories of miracles and hope. People celebrated the rising of the midwinter sun after the shortest night. Fire played a central role in these rites as they attempted to preserve the sun's strength to coax its return. The rituals varied from simple celebrations to longer, more complex ceremonies of sacrifice and prayers to the god and goddess. The use of fire and evergreens to remind them of the bounty of the summer and spring were common features, especially in northern areas. And over the centuries, people celebrated the winter solstice in so many ways, with customs and rituals that are a part of many of our traditions today. Some peoples built elaborate temples and stone circles to mark when the sun reappeared at the solstice. We can see this in many of the stone circles that still remain in Great Britain, such as Newgrange in Ireland and Stonehenge in England. They mark the solstices for what were likely religious rites. Some felt that they could coax the midwinter sun's light back through their actions. They prayed, they performed, they danced, they feasted, they did incantations. They prayed and marked the rites of fertility and death and rebirth, a cycle connected to that sun's journey from the waxing to the waning, from the year behind and ahead. Solstices were also considered special times, gateways to another world, when the spirits and other worldly beings roamed the earth. It was a time of mystery and magic, fear, joy, and celebration. And it still is. As many cultures and traditions, old and new, mark and celebrate the winter solstice, it is also today a part of so many traditions, not in altered forms, but for those who are pagan or earth-centered spirituality, still a central part of their practice. I have friends who went out and chose Yule logs this week and burned it yesterday, decorated their homes with evergreens and candlelight for a different purpose, gathered with family and friends for a time of introspection and expectation. So what can the solstice do for us? If this is not a part of our tradition or something that we may have only thought about in passing, marking the solstice and the seasons opens us to new ways to reflect on our lives. A colleague reminded me recently that there are seasons in our lives. And oh, how we forget in a capitalist, productivity-driven culture. Seasons in our lives as friends, as parents, our careers. The ebbs and flows are a natural part of our living, our creativity, our thriving. And when a time like winter arrives, when it feels like winter is our life, when we wait, when we are in the betwixt and the between when it feels like our world has been stripped bare of the delights of spring and summer, those places are not places of failure or complete loss. Rather, winter moments are times for reflection, for rest, trying new things, gathering our resources, gathering them around us. Much like the trees who let go of the leaves and send their life-giving nutrients down to their roots. Parker Palmer, the Quaker writer and activist and teacher, asked a question earlier this month on Facebook. Some of you may still be on Facebook. I am still there. And I've been pondering it all month long. He wrote about one of his favorite paintings from Taos, New Mexico. It's by a native artist, and it depicts the Taos Pueblo underneath a blanket of snow. He writes, "The Pueblo was one of the first structures built here in North America around 1000 CE, and it's believed to be the oldest continuously inhabited community in the United States. So the people who call this place home have been there and persevered through all kinds of winters, literally and metaphorically. And they have done this for a millennium and more. Palmer keeps this image of the Pueblo on his desk, not because he's looking for tips or tricks and techniques from the red willow people on how to winter, how to make it through to the other side. He recognizes that their methods are deeply intertwined with indigenous culture and that they have faced against greater odds than he will ever face. But instead, the picture on his desk reminds him to find, to discover, to identify what he calls his own deep roots in the ground of his own life. Roots that can survive the winter, keep heart, keep mind, keep soul alive. Palmer reminds us, in case we are in doubt, that the spring will come, as it always does and always will, but not always, I would add, in the way that we hoped or expected. So how do we winter through, my people? How do we winter through? And I would add to Palmer's question that how does one winter through? How do we winter through whatever we're facing, individually or as a community? Winter is indeed a special time in the wheel of the year. Despite all appearances, of course, nature is not dead in winter. It has gone underground to renew itself to prepare for spring. The famous poet Rumi says this beautiful line about underneath the blanket of snow, the roots are riotous. And so we are as well. Winter is a time when we may feel diminished, but there's so much possibility. So for me, winter has an even greater gift to give. It comes when the sky is clear, the sun is brilliant, the trees are bare, the first snow yet to come. It is the gift of utter clarity. In winter, one can walk in the woods that have been opaque with that growth of summer. Palmer talks about how you can see the trees clearly, individually, and together. You can see the ground they are rooted in. In these times of winter, we hear so many songs this season talking about it's the most wonderful time of the year. And as my colleague Randy reminded us this morning, sometimes that makes some of us feel left out, that it doesn't feel like that for us. Indeed, the winter solstice invites us into a time of introspection and reflection, forgiveness and healing. Noticing that ebb and flow within ourselves, the tending of our wounds, the opening of our spirits to that which can restore, redeem, empower, and strengthen us. Steve Schick, in a book on the solstice celebrations, invites us to think also of the solstice in another way. How do I winter through? What are my resources? What is missing? Parker Palmer asks us. I ask you how we winter through together. And then this. Schick says, solstice celebrations capture the moment when the darkness gives way to the light. For thousands of years, people have tried to hold on to that moment of joy and certainty. 5,000 years ago at Newgrange in Ireland, people built a circular chamber that let a shaft of light travel deep into the central part of it on the dawning of the winter solstice. And there, inside the chamber, perfectly placed so that beam of light would center on it when the winter solstice arrived, that light pierced the darkness and illuminated intricate symbols, including eye-shaped carvings. Constructing shafts for the light to penetrate deeply into the central chambers of our heart is an effort that must take place in the time of waiting and uncertainty, in a time before we can see or hear or feel clearly the way forward. It's a time when we can make adjustments, reach out, do new things, join with others. And so Schick asks us, what can we do in this waiting moment? Just in the last few weeks, but it happens year-round here at All Souls, I've been doing work with our justice teams. I was over at the Unity Learning Academy, helping to serve a dinner with the family and children of this public school in Tulsa that we've been partners with for how many years, Marlon? 20, almost 30 years, almost 30 years. And hear that relationship long and abiding, and to see the families together beaming at this dinner was such a joy. To see children earlier this week shopping for the hats and the underwear and the gloves and the other donations that All Souls members and friends provided. Coming up on January 6th, our community organizing arm, Action, is inviting people here to the church to sing, to ground ourselves for the work ahead. And coming up on January 26th, the Climate Justice Revival, with programming and a way to get rooted in that cause. There's so many ways in this waiting time to practice the dawning of the light that is both about our inner resources, our resources together, but making certain that that light goes out. Schick reminds us that no solitary individual assembled the great circular stones at Newgrange and other places. People gathered together to build a chamber where the light could be reflected in each other's eyes. In this way, during this winter, we have an opportunity. Waiting is not the same as being passive. Living in this time requires active waiting, active hope. And so Schick leaves us with this question. The only question is, will we, in this waiting time, build a chamber of light that can be reflected widely enough so that others can see its beauty? Happy solstice. Blessed be, and amen.